I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, the path to a new government in Israel. With the fourth Israeli elections in 2 years behind us, Israel's President Rivlin gave current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the chance to establish a government based on the results. What are his chances of success, and what are the alternatives? To answer these questions and more, I am joined by my good friend Kobi Cohen. Kobi is an Israeli political analyst and the host of Balagan, Israeli Politics and Society podcast. Kobi, how are you?
I'm doing great, Shahar. How are you doing?
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. So tell us, just to start off our conversation, please explain the process to us. What exactly did President Rivlin do, and what were his options?
So let's start with the process, as you said. On April 6th, the president actually gave Prime Minister Netanyahu 28 days to try and muster a coalition. The basic law says that the mandate will go to the person with the highest chances of forming a coalition. It doesn't state that it needs to have 61 members of the Knesset to recommend on, but the highest number. Therefore, the president gave it to him. Netanyahu had 52 lawmakers who endorsed him, which was made out of the LIKUD party with 30 mandates, Shas with 9, UTJ, United Torah Judaism with 7, and Religious Zionism with 6. On the other hand, Yair Lapid, his competitor, was only able to get 45 signatures, 45 supporters, made out of Yesh Atid with 17, Blue and White with 8, Israel Beitenu with 7, Labor with 7, and Meretz with 6. Another person who was recommended to the president was actually Naftali Bennett, who was endorsed by his own members of the YAMINA party. And 3 parties decided not to recommend any account, and that was New Hope, Gideon Saar's new party, New Hope with 6 mandates, and the 2 Arab parties, the Joint List was 6 mandates, and Ram with 4. Netanyahu will now have, he will have eventually 28 days to try and form a coalition.
Wait, Kobi, just before we go to what's going to happen as of now, you were saying that Yair Lapid had 45 signatures behind him, Netanyahu had 52, and Naftali Bennett 7. Is the president's decision based only on this number, or is he allowed to take other issues into consideration? For instance, the fact that Netanyahu is facing criminal indictments in court. Does that play any part at all in the president's decision?
So the moral aspects of who's going to form a coalition is not, it's not something that was formed in the law. And actually the President Rivlin did say that he's not giving it, he's giving it with a heavy heart because, and I would like to quote that he said that he gave Prime Minister Netanyahu the first crack in forming a government, but noted that he was doing so reluctantly, both because no party leader appeared to have enough support to succeed at cobbling together a ruling coalition, and because he had moral and ethical reservations, given that Netanyahu is on trial for corruption. He actually refused to meet with Netanyahu in person. If we'll be clear on that, in two different opportunities, the president refused to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu this past week. The first one was when he gave him the mandate. Usually, he invites the candidate to the president's residency. There is a press conference. He's being handled. They shake hands, and the president gives his blessing. The president refused to do that. He made his own, press conference, made his announcement, and that was it. Second chance was actually when the new Knesset sworn in. There is a traditional photo op of the Supreme Court judges, the leaders of the different parties, the Prime Minister and the President, and President Rivlin was absent. He refused to join, to be on the same podium with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it shows something about the ongoing, not so healthy relationships. But eventually, put morals aside, legally he had no argument why not handing out to Netanyahu.
So the feeling is that there was no sense of celebration in swearing in of this current Knesset, the 24th. But the real question for me here is for you. The Supreme Court already ruled on the issue that Benjamin Netanyahu is able to proceed politically. And yet the president chose to shun what supposedly was the vote of over 1 million Israelis who voted in favor of Netanyahu. That's, without even taking the members of the bloc itself. Do you feel that the president was to some degree out of line, or was that a reflection of the current feeling in Israel vis-a-vis what's happening in Israeli politics in the past couple of years?
I think that eventually he did reflect the concerns of a lot of Israelis. If you're looking at the polls, about how many Israelis think that actually Netanyahu is guilty, and everything around the corruption cases, then Israel is divided. More than 50% actually believe that he did do what he's charged with, but once again, most people say, let the court decide what's going to happen. And so even if morally he thinks that Netanyahu shouldn't form the next government, there is nothing legally based that he can do to prevent it. And if, to be honest, the Supreme Court doesn't want to, it's like the hottest potato around, and the Supreme Court didn't want to intervene. And he said, listen, you have the lawmakers, that's what the law says. We are strictly, going with the law.
And as far as the president's decision to give the power to Benjamin, give him the first crack at establishing a new government, you mentioned Gideon Saar's New Hope Party, and Saar was public about, if you want to vote for Netanyahu, don't vote for me. He did not give his support to Netanyahu, as was predicted. However, he also did not give his support to anyone else. He didn't give it to Naftali Bennett, and he didn't give it to Yair Lapid. Now, potentially, understanding from what you said, 45 who voted for Lapid, and you would have taken 6 more for Saar, that would have put Lapid at 51, which is almost as much as Netanyahu has had, maybe giving the president some leverage to maybe give the mandate to Lapid instead of Netanyahu. Is that your feeling as well? And why did he do what he did if he vowed to bring about a change in Israeli government?
So I'll bring out 2 names. You mentioned Gideon Saar on one hand, but I'll also add Naftali Bennett on the other hand, because it seems, for some people, it will look ridiculous that, the leader of a small party with 7 seats will endorse himself to, recommend himself to form the next coalition. But I think that what's happening with both Bennett and Gideon Saar, eventually, the right wing have 76 seats in the Knesset. If you're taking Lieberman's Israel Beitenu, Naftali Bennett with YAMINA, and Gideon Saar with New Hope. Lieberman and Gideon Saar are 2 that already said that they are unwilling that Netanyahu will be the next prime minister. And Gideon Saar he repeats the same message. He's telling his old friends from the Likud, replace Netanyahu, and we can have a right-wing government. But Netanyahu is vetoed. And when it comes to that, and when Gideon Saar has a strategic thinking, I mean, he's, as you say, he's a fox. He's a political fox. And he has a lot of experience. He lacks the charisma, but he does know his moves in politics. And he knows that if he wants to succeed, in the long run with the right wing, he cannot join hands with Yair Lapid. And same for Naftali Bennett. Eventually, both Naftali Bennett and Gideon Saar are looking at the days after Netanyahu's era ends. So they need to really be careful. You know, you said that if it's my concern, I think that they did the right thing for themselves. And if you're looking at what's happening in the anti-Bibi coalition, or you know, what Yair Lapid named as the change camp, it's so split among itself. Even with the Arabs list, we discussed it in the past, you know, that the left-wingers in Israel always saw the Arabs, and actually the right wing did it also. All the Arabs are the same thing, but they're not the same thing. Ram with Abbas Mansour are hard-right Muslims. I mean, they are actually a part of the global Muslim Brotherhood. And if we think who are their allies in other countries, you can name Hamas in Gaza, okay, or in the with the Palestinians. You can talk about the Muslim Brothers in Egypt. They are their world allies. So it's funny that now Netanyahu is willing to form a coalition being supported by Ram, okay, being endorsed by Ram from outside, and the left wing is now saying that it's not okay.
You know, the saying about politics and bedfellows. Now let's jump into the process itself that you referred to before as well. Netanyahu, what's going to happen now? Netanyahu received the first chance. He has 28 days. How is that going to work?
So Netanyahu, technically, let's start with the process itself. Netanyahu has 28 days. If he sees that it's not enough for him, he can reach out to the president and ask for a 14 days extension. Then the president has two chances, or actually three. Either give him an extension.
Before we go to the end of that period, Netanyahu is 4 weeks plus 2 weeks, potentially. But
yes,
what do you think are his chances of success as from what it looks like now?
I think that they are really low. I mean, I wouldn't say really low, but they are low. I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu will try to draw back, and now it will sound funny to you, somebody like Benny Gantz and Blue and White back again into his coalition for two reasons. First thing, Netanyahu's main concern...
I understand what you just said, Kobi. Netanyahu is 52. He needs to have at least 61 to have a strong government, or maybe even less, as long as he has the support of the majority.
Right.
And let's say he gets Naftali Bennett, which is 7 seats. He gets 59, a couple more. You're telling me now that after everything that happened in the past year and a half with Benny Gantz and the alternative prime minister story, this is what he's aiming at, having Benny Gantz join his government again?
This is not what he's aiming for. But actually, for Netanyahu, he doesn't really care what will be the formation of his coalition. He was just legitimizing, Ram, the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel. And he just wants to form the next coalition. He wants to stay in power. And for him, it was always great. If you look at, that was by the way, his strategy. He was always pulling somebody from the left into his coalition for two reasons. One, it was some sort of a shield, to the world to show, okay, we are more balanced, we are not hard right. But on the other hand, to his people, to his base, it was a great way to say, oh my God, they are blocking me. I can't really have my, all of my policies done because I'm being, stopped by, first it was the Labour Party, then it was Yair Lapid and Tzipi Livni. Every time he has somebody else to blame, and it works great for him because he needs it. He always Netanyahu is a skilled politician. So he will always have a target to work against. And, for Benny Gantz, it will be in a way some sort of a proof that he's the defender of democracy. I wouldn't be surprised if he will argue between Naftali Smotrich and Benny Gantz on who's going to get the justice, the Minister of Justice, for example.
So Netanyahu's real chance of success is getting such parties who are part of the bloc of change at the moment to come and join his new coalition.
Yeah, he did it in the past. I mean, if you look at the last coalition, Netanyahu was able to dissolve competitor, his main I wouldn't call it enemy, but his main, challenger, which was blue and white. He dragged Benny Gantz into a coalition. And if he'll need to do it again, he will do it again. I don't know what will be with Benny Gantz himself. I mean, for him, that's what he did. He can always say, I jumped on the grenade again.
But if we dive into the quagmire of Israeli politics, Netanyahu doesn't really need to attract all of the members of, let's say, Blue and White or New Hope or any of the other opposing bloc members. He can pinpoint individuals, can't he? He can target specific people on specific lists to join him, thus gaining the 3-4 votes he needs to have a majority in the parliament.
Yes, but I think it will be harder for him. He did it in the last time with Orly Levy, who deserted the Labor and Meretz. He did it with Tzvi Hauser and Yoaz Hendel, who deserted Telem, which was a part of Blue and White slate. But in this Knesset, I doubt if he'll be able to get deserters, because the parties themselves are more coherent. And the people, for example, that works with the Gideon Sa'ar, they all got hurt by Netanyahu, and I doubt if they'll be willing to go to another coalition with him.
But so was Benny Gantz. When you talk about hurt, he was the epitome of hurt in what was happening in Israel and his public image in the past year and a half.
I agree, but he still stayed. He stick to his seat.
He did.
And I think that Netanyahu, if you think about it, he was the raging bull that Netanyahu was riding in the rodeo. Netanyahu was the raging bull, and he was the rider. But eventually, he wasn't able to get rid of the cowboy. And that's, I gotta say, I mean, if you look at it as an outsider, the fact that Benny Gantz stick to his position, and he said, "I'm gonna stay like a bone in Netanyahu's throat." I mean, some people say it's crazy. Eventually it worked for him. He was able to gain 8 mandates with this policy.
Definitely showed stamina. So Netanyahu has 28 days. Does the president have to give, in case he does not succeed, does the president have to give him the extra 2 weeks? And if not, what then?
So the president is not obligated to give him the extra 14 days. Technically, if there will be any changes, between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, for example, they can come to the president and ask to get the mandate, and the president can approve that. So then, Yair Lapid will have actually 14 days to try and form a coalition. It will be shorter, and he can get an extension of another 14 days. The third option is...
So 28, let's say the president gives Netanyahu 14 days or doesn't give. At the end of the 14 days, he needs to make a decision. That decision is either to give the mandate to someone else, potentially Lapid or Bennett or whomever, or
he can send it back to the Knesset and tell them, you guys need to figure out who's going to lead the next government. They need to find somebody, the members of the Knesset. And if they don't...
Wait, so he doesn't have to give the mandate to someone else? He can...
He's not obligated to give it to someone else.
So he can decide post Netanyahu that no chance, I'm going to take it back to the Knesset. And Lapid can't come to him and say, hey, you gave Netanyahu a chance, why not me?
Because the president has this, the freedom. He's not obligated by law to give it to another person, to somebody else to try. He can send it back to the Knesset. Now, the members of the Knesset knows that if it goes back to them and they are undecisive and nobody will be able to form a coalition, then we're going to a 5th round of election.
Wait. Let me just understand this. So it goes back to the Knesset. In the Knesset itself, what do they need to do? And how long do they have to do it?
They will have 14 days to figure out how to form a coalition within the Knesset.
14 days or 21 days?
14 after the president, refuses to give the opportunity to any competitor.
And if they're unable to get behind a member
of the Knesset dissolves, and we go to a 5th round of election, and that's 3 months after the Knesset dissolves.
So that's automatic, right? They don't need to
automatic
on dissolving the Knesset. If they get this period of time, if they can't rally 61 votes behind one person, the Knesset automatically dissolves, and Israel dives into a 5th round of elections. Amazing, isn't it, Kobi?
I think it's sad, mostly.
Do you think there is, looking at the different scenarios of a possible Netanyahu government, an alternative government, or a 5th round of elections, how do you see it going forward? What do you think are the chances of any of these scenarios happening?
I think that, unfortunately, even if Netanyahu will be able to form another coalition, it won't last more than a year, because he will have to compromise, and either he'll be able, to join forces between Betzalel Smotrich of the religious Zionist right and Mansour Abbas, and to get, the support of Ram list from the outside and have a minority government, which is hard. I can hardly see it happening. I mean, Betzalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, they are hard right ideologists, so they hardly compromise on where they stand. I mean, it's not like with for example, with the ultra-Orthodox, or saying, we just want our piece in the cake, okay, and we don't care what you're going to do with all the rest.
But there have been whispers of a potential, like you indicated before, Naftali Bennett as prime minister?
I would say that morally it's wrong, because he didn't get the support. If people wanted him, he said that he's competing, he is a candidate to being prime minister. He only got 7 seats. It means that most people didn't want him eventually. But there is no ruling against it, because eventually what the law says, a member of the Knesset who's able to form a coalition. And Yair Lapid actually offered him that they will have a par government between him, Lapid, Gideon Sa'ar, and Israel Beitenu, Lieberman, who eventually together, they have 20 mandates. Yair Lapid has 17 with the Labor and Meretz, so they will have it some sort of an equal government. But they refuse to do that. They refuse to go with a government that will have, left-wing elements in it.
And the left-wing elements are Labor and Meretz, the more progressive parties to the left.
Well, Meretz is the more progressive. Now there are barely, it's quite blurry between them and the Labor, but Labor was more centric in the past.
And one last thing, just so that our viewers understand. The main division, point of contention here, bone of contention between the two sides is the person himself, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
So if the Likud was headed by somebody else, like, let's say, Nir Barkat, the former Jerusalem mayor, and Netanyahu were to go on his path of retiring or becoming Israel's president, then you would have a stable, liberal, secular-controlled, right-wing governments or center-right with many parties which are now in the Knesset. Is that a correct assumption, Kobi?
Not exactly, and I'll tell you why. Because eventually, as much as the right wing is trying to portray it, and the ultra-Orthodox are leaning right, the ultra-Orthodox will go with the left if the left will give them their piece, their piece in the budget. The main challenge is that with Netanyahu, he's the strongest brand in Israeli politics. And I doubt, by the way, if the Likud party will gain 30 mandates with other candidates at this situation. You were mentioning Nir Barkat, with what Netanyahu did to him, most of the, I'll say it differently.
No. I didn't mean in the elections. I meant right now.
Right now, it wouldn't be a secular. It will be a hard right-wing, ultra-Orthodox government, yes.
Without Benjamin Netanyahu.
Without Netanyahu. So eventually he's blocking, and he's telling people, you can't veto me. I don't veto you, even though he always vetoed somebody. Even Naftali Bennett and Gideon.
Now it's coming back to bite him in the behind. But
yes.
Let me ask you just one last question to conclude with. Do you feel that most chances are that Israel is headed in the direction of a fifth election, or how do you see this unfolding?
So that's a hard question. I really hope we are not going to a fifth round of election, but I think that it's in the next year, it's inevitable. Because even if Netanyahu will be able to form a coalition, or even if Lapid will be able to form a coalition, I can't see how they stick it, how they keep its parts stick. And it's going to be impossible to rule. You need to have goodwill and no ego from any of the parties. And, politicians, it starts with the ego.
Two amazing elements in politics, goodwill and no ego.
No, most of them actually have the goodwill, but the ego always wins.
Well, I just want to, say thank you, Kobi. I think this has been an enlightening discussion and a very fascinating one for truly mavens in Israeli politics. And I appreciate, so do all of our viewers, your incredible insights and knowledge in this unbelievable quagmire of policies.
Thank you very much, Shahar. Always a pleasure to join you and to our audience, and looking forward for the next time.
So we will follow closely as events continue to unfold in the hope for some political stability in Israel, even though that may be, as Kobi said, somewhat temporary. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and to all we wish to stay safe and stay healthy. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, shalom and lehitraot.